The war between Ukraine and Russia has shaken almost all the basic balances in the world political arena. Especially nowadays, the tension in the political field has reached the countries of the ocean. Both political and naval confrontations are taking place in the Pacific and South China Seas. As China's renewed pressure on Taiwan increases, the USA, which is trying to protect itself from the danger of China, is another country that is the guest of this tension. Tension has risen after a series of menacing exercises by the Chinese Navy in the Taiwan Strait. US submarines and warships initially studied the situation in the region. However, with the outbreak of tension, the U.S. 7th Fleet took action. The passage of the U.S. Navy warship USS Milius through the Taiwan Strait and its presence there alarmed China. Now, after measuring the general tension in the region, we will discuss the power demonstrations of the U.S. and Chinese navies in the South China Sea and the regional power elements and their global effects in the shadow of the Ukraine war. Taiwan again fell into a difficult position in the Pacific. China's aggressive actions mobilized the U.S. Navy in the Pacific. Russia, on the other hand, is one of the most important countries at the center of this tension. Japan, which opposes Russia's actions in the South China Sea and critical areas of the Pacific Ocean and is seen as Ukraine's ally, is another member of dangerous relations. But in this global arena, the position of the USA and the strategy it follows are the most fundamental factors that shape the steps of both China and Russia. The US stance on Taiwan is that it should be free from the Chinese threat, like Japan and Australia. Indeed, Taiwan's security has long been a concern for the United States and its allies. But the recent Russian invasion of Ukraine and the increasingly determined rhetoric from Beijing have made the possibility of a clash even more tangible. The risk of clashes increased even more after Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy hosted Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen for talks on U.S. soil, claiming Taiwan as its own and describing Tsai as a separatist. China responded to this meeting by launching three-day military exercises around the island on April 8 through 10. 71 war jets and 9 warships of the Chinese Army participated in this exercise. This exercise brought the tension in the South China Sea to its peak. In other words, as we mentioned, the tension and excitement in the diplomatic field was reflected in critical maritime regions such as the South China Sea, Malacca, and Taiwan Strait. But the USA was watching all the movements of China in the South China Sea very closely. Therefore, a response from the USA to this military exercise carried out by China was not delayed after the U.S. Navy sent a destroyer to the South China Sea for only the second time this year. The presence of a U.S. warship in the Taiwan Strait again has alarmed China. The Navy's 7th Fleet, the USS Milius, has crossed the Taiwan Strait. Sea of the PLA reported that the United States followed the Arleigh-class guided missile interceptor through the passage of Chinese forces. Taiwan's defense ministry said in a statement on this matter that Milius, unaccompanied by other friendly ships, sailed north through the strait. After this critical move by the USA, Russia's Pacific Fleet carried out anti-submarine exercises in the Sea of Japan with a total of 3 corvettes. Japan and the Philippines were alarmed by the participation of Russia in this critical naval struggle. However, the passage of Milius, the naval power of the USA through the Taiwan Strait, and his presence there were among the main factors that deterred both China and Russia. In fact, Navy ships and sometimes U.S. allies ships have passed through the Taiwan Strait at fairly regular intervals in recent years. US ships passed through the Taiwan Strait 9 times in 2022 and 12 times in 2021. Last January, the destroyer USS Jung-hoon passed through the strait. In February, a US P-8, a maritime patrol aircraft, crossed the Taiwan Strait before carrying out a similar operation. Now, as we mentioned, Milius crossed the Taiwan Strait during this critical time. In fact, 50% of every container ship that travels the world every day passes through the Taiwan Strait because 70% or more of the computer chips produced at the high end in the world are produced in Taiwan. Meanwhile, Colonel Shai, spokesman of the People's Liberation Army Eastern Front Command, made critical statements regarding Milius's passing through the strait. Colonel Shai reported that Chinese troops are always on high alert to resolutely defend national sovereignty and security, and regional peace and stability. As a result of this statement, the ropes between the two countries began to stretch. In fact, the United States does not formally oppose China's decades-long political alliance with Taiwan, which is today a democratically governed island nation, and its people show little interest in being governed from Beijing. But Washington's long-standing policy insists that the strait divergence be resolved peacefully without the use of coercion or force. Milius says passage through the Taiwan Strait also sheds light on Washington's current policy. Less than a week after China completed 3-day military exercises around Taiwan in response to talks on U.S. soil between House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen, Milius crossed the Taiwan Strait. In other words, the USA is always on standby to protect Taiwan from the danger of China. Washington officials anticipated that this meeting would seriously mobilize China because Beijing views Tsai as a separatist and often accuses America's political leaders of meddling in Taiwan's internal affairs. But Taipei argues that China has no right to dictate the island nation's foreign relations. In fact, the Washington administration's stance on Taiwan is also supported by the U.S. local population. Also, the U.S. thinks that China and Russia pose a danger because of the Ukraine war. According to the U.S. people, apart from these two countries, there are two more surprise countries that are seen as a threat. Let's take a look at these stunning data together. US public support for direct involvement in a contingency in Taiwan rose to 56%, according to a Redfield and Wilton Strategies survey of 1,500 eligible adults. In other words, more than half of Americans stated that they would support the United States and its allies to defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion. The field work took place the day before House Speaker Kevin McCarthy hosted Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen for talks on U.S. soil alongside growing support for Taiwan's defense. The survey proved that many view China as the greatest threat to American interests. In addition, according to this survey, the countries that the American people see as the biggest threat after China are Russia, North Korea, and Iran, respectively. It was quite remarkable that the American people currently see China as a much greater threat than Russia. In fact, the decade-long decline in U.S.-Chinese political ties had a serious impact on both communities in America. Negative views towards the Chinese government are high, and confidence in its leader, Xi Jinping, is quite low. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin said in a statement that the responsibility for this situation does not belong to China. These statements seriously affect the opinion of citizens in China, and even for some time, rumors and disinformation from anti-Chinese forces have seriously misled the public and clouded the judgments of people in the respective countries. In this regard, Taiwan comes to the fore with statements that support the USA. Taiwan is one of the few subjects to cross the political corridor in the United States. Obviously, there has always been a hidden amount of public support for Taiwan. On the other hand, the Biden administration reversed the U.S. government's 30-year-old policy of engagement with China, now embarking on a competition spanning the geoeconomic spectrum. Both the major parties and most Americans agreed on this new look, because if you're talking about competition with China, the American people should have your back, no matter how much the U.S. policy of protecting Taiwan put China on the line. Washington did not give up on this stance. Under the TRA, the United States has sold $21 billion in defense supplies and services to Taiwan since 2019, according to the U.S. State Department. US lawmakers ratified intensifying. The deals also noted a backlog of production and deliveries approaching $19 billion, including $8 billion. For this reason, the USA stands ready against all kinds of threats that may come from both China and other countries in this critical area. Currently, this agreement requires the United States to maintain its capacity to resist any force or other form of coercion in the region that would endanger the security or social or economic system of the Taiwanese people in the region. But this delicate situation in Taiwan will trigger discussions between the White House and Congress, despite President Joe Biden's suggestions to the contrary. It is not seen as a tangible defense guarantee of the kind America offers its European and Asian allies. On the other hand, while China undoubtedly takes into account the role of the United States in any future war, it remains long-standing U.S. policy to plan whether American forces will intervene in a clash. But Biden's repeated personal commitments were largely embraced by Americans because a large part of the United States, including 48% of Republican voters and 58% of Democratic voters in the United States, believe the treaty is committed to protecting Taiwan from a Chinese attack. When Biden became junior senator of Delaware in 1973, Washington and Taipei were still officially treaty allies. Currently, the U.S. stance has not changed and it continues to protect Taiwan against the Chinese threat. The war between Ukraine and Russia is about to escalate. There have been many developments on the front line this week, but the most notable event was the crash of a U.S. UAV over the Black Sea by colliding with a Russian jet. The Pentagon welcomed this event professionally and did not allow tensions to escalate between NATO and Russia. However, the wreckage of the US UAV is important, and in this case, Turkey, a NATO country, may allow US ships to pass through the straits. So how did the event take place, and what kind of path did the USA, Turkey, and Russia follow in the Black Sea after this event? This week, a Russian Su-27 came face-to-face with the MQ-9 Reaper unmanned aerial vehicle carrying out a reconnaissance mission. Allegedly, the pilot of the Su-27 deliberately dumped fuel on the UAV, and the UAV was buried in the Black Sea waters with an engine failure. This incident ignited a minor tension between the USA and Russia, whose relations were already at a level of rupture. The US State Department summoned the Russian ambassador for an urgent meeting on the matter, and the US Navy in the Mediterranean went to the alert level. Russia, on the other hand, claimed they were not wrong in the incident and that the US drone violated Russian airspace. However, the US and NATO UAVs have been flying over the Black Sea for months, and the US MQ-9 Reaper was flying 120 kilometers off the Crimea. This region is the international sea and airspace of the Black Sea. The United States contacted Turkey in order to send some of its ships deployed in the Mediterranean to the Ukrainian shores and ensure the safety of its elements there within the scope of emergency measures. Turkey's defense minister plans to allow U.S. ships to pass through the Bosphorus after the incident with the MQ-9 Reaper drone. The crash of the U.S. tactical attack drone in the Black Sea waters was a situation that allowed Turkey to bring US warships into the Black Sea waters through the Bosphorus. Information on the subject was announced by Hulusi Akar, Minister of National Defense of Turkey. Within the scope of communication between Russian Federation aircraft and U.S. forces, information about the crash of the drone immediately reached Turkey. Turkey is following the events closely and continues to hold various contacts. Turkey, which tries to solve this problem in a reasonable and logical way, both within the country and through negotiations with its interlocutors. The Americans is in favor of a peaceful solution. The Turkish president, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Ministry of National Defense are working closely with the U.S. warships to enter the Bosphorus. The decision will be announced as soon as possible. The appearance of U.S. warships in Black Sea waters could clearly lead to a serious escalation, as it will most likely try to prevent Russia from hitting Ukraine's critical infrastructure. So can U.S. ships easily enter the Black Sea? In order to answer this question, we need to examine the Montrose Straits contract in detail. Montrose, the international agreement signed in 1936 that gives Turkey control over the Istanbul and Dardanelles Straits and the right to regulate the passage of warships, gives Turkey full control over the straits and guarantees the free passage of civilian ships in peacetime. The convention limits the passage of warships belonging to countries that do not have a coast on the Black Sea. The terms of the contract have been the subject of debate over the years, especially as it grants the Soviet Union's navy access to the Mediterranean. It replaced the Straits Convention, signed with the Lausanne Treaty in 1923. With this agreement, the task of the International Straits Commission was terminated. Turkey has always been concerned about the restrictions imposed by the Straits Convention, which was signed with the Treaty of Lausanne. With the resumption of the arms race, Turkey's uneasiness increased gradually, relying on disarmament hopes that were up to date at the time the convention was signed. When Turkey announced its unrest and its proposal to change the status of the straits to the signatory states, it had seen a common understanding from almost all of these states, which started to take place in different polls. In a note of the UK Foreign Office, dated the 23rd of July 1936, it was stated that Turkey's request for the amendment of the Straits Convention is considered justified. The following article about the passage of Montrose warships through the straits is important in time of war. If Turkey is not at war, the warships will enjoy complete freedom of passage and round trip in the straits under the specified conditions. In this article, the U.S. Navy can reach the Black Sea if the Turkish government approves, but a critical article of the contract can prevent U.S. ships from entering the Black Sea. The relevant article states, warships of any warring state shall be prohibited from passing through the straits except in case of assistance to an attack state and under a mutual aid treaty binding Turkey. The downing of the drone would be an outright declaration of war for the United States. As it turns out to be a deliberate action by Russia in such a case, the Monroe Convention prohibits both U.S. and Russian ships from entering and leaving the Black Sea. At the moment, the crisis between the two countries seems to be about to be resolved through diplomatic means, but it is difficult to predict what the situation will be in the future. The entry of U.S. ships into the Black Sea will be perceived as a threat by Russian President Vladimir Putin, and the risk of the war spreading out of Ukraine as a result is too great. So what path will Russia follow? A senior Russian official said Moscow will try to salvage the wreckage of the drone. It was reported that the drone was most likely broke in during the accident, and the remaining debris likely sank to a depth of thousands of feet in the Black Sea. An official said the Russians had arrived at the crash site and would likely manage to collect some pieces of debris, such as metal pieces, and that the United States had taken mitigation measures to prevent the loss of any sensitive intelligence. US officials have spoken quite confidently that what is valuable has no residual value. Video released by the Pentagon, captured by a camera aboard the MQ-9, shows a fighter jet passing close at first and then making another pass and crashing into the drone's propeller. The footage briefly disappears after the collision, but returns to show that the propeller had been damaged by the impact. The Air Force said. The Air Force said in a statement accompanying the video that the Russian jet dumped fuel on the MQ-9 and crashed into its propeller, forcing U.S. forces to drop the MQ-9 in international waters. In the statement, it was stated that the video released by the European Command of the U.S. military was edited for a long time, but the events were depicted in order. The U.S. European Command has asked the Russians to examine the intelligence benefits of drone flights against the escalation risks to the restricted area declared over the Black Sea. Is re-evaluating drone operations. It remains to be seen what path the two countries will follow. If the U.S. wants to bring its ships into the Black Sea, this naturally means that Turkey should be involved. But Turkey, despite all the news and speculation, has made its side clear on the anniversary of the fake referendum held in Crimea. Turkey reiterated its commitment to Ukraine's territorial integrity and that it will not recognize Russia's annexation attempt. The Autonomous Republic of Crimea, which is part of Ukraine, was annexed by the Russian Federation 9 years ago in an illegal referendum and in violation of international law. In a statement made by the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the occasion of the anniversary of the annexation, it reiterated its assurances that the situation was not recognized and stated that it continues to support Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. In the statement, it was stated that the situation of the Crimean Tatars, who are the indigenous people of Crimea, is always a priority for Turkey. Turkey also reiterated that it will continue to support the Crimean Tatars, whom it sees as a brotherly people, to preserve their identity and live in safety and peace in their homeland of Crimea. Turkey is a very important actor, both as a location and as a NATO member, especially shortly before the start of the Ukrainian offensives against Crimea. Turkey's support statement was not well received by Russian President Vladimir Putin, and the fact that US ships will pass through the Turkish Straits seems to affect the relations between the two countries. Although Turkey has supported Ukraine's war efforts since the beginning of the war, it still maintains its commercial relations with Russia. And if we assume that the Turkish economy has been in decline in recent years and that Russia has been struggling with economic sanctions, the deterioration of commercial relations will not benefit either country. It is difficult to predict what the situation will be in the coming days, but Turkey's role in the war between Ukraine and Russia does not seem to end in the short term. There are a lot of updates from the east as Russians concentrated their efforts on taking the city block by block. Almost all of Wagner forces, elite personnel were deployed to Bakhmut with increased number of targets. Ukrainians started accumulating more artillery systems, and as the Russians started moving in their equipment inside the city, Ukrainians started using HIMARS to target buildings that they use as warehouses. Last time I told you that the speculations about Ukrainians conducting a tactical withdrawal towards the railways was correct. I also told you that over the course of 2 days, Ukrainians were stepping back by 1 or 2 streets per day, maintaining a straight front line. The freshest reports suggest that the rate of withdrawal remained the same as in previous days, because today the front line shifted approximately by 1 street in the upper center. Ukrainians reportedly left the eastern part completely because staying there for a long time would cost Ukrainians a lot of losses. This area is almost entirely comprised of 1 or 2 story houses which are surrounded by the industrial zone and high-rise buildings. So these positions were pretty weak and Ukrainians loved them in one go. In the bottom center, the situation is more complex. Here Ukrainians are aligned on 2 lines of high-rise buildings, which allows for a slower-paced withdrawal. After Wagner forces established control over the Stadium Metallurg, the line of contact moved towards the Church of All Saints. The latest reports indicate that Russians entered the high-rise building at the intersection, which allowed them to secure control over the church and half of the park. When it comes to the territory south of this park, it is still under Ukrainian control. For now, the clashes are reportedly taking place in front of school number 7. The buildings nearby help to create a powerful block, which gives a relative advantage and allows to exert significant control over the southern outskirts. Such a setting explains a slower rate of Russian advancement. Nonetheless, when it comes to the stadium, avant-garde, after several days of intense clashes, Ukrainians were reportedly pushed out of this area and are now holding the line along Kowalska Street. The new setting also gives more work for Ukrainian snipers. After assuming control over new streets, Wagner forces are yet unfamiliar with which areas are under total sniper control, which leads to a higher toll when trying to cross the streets. One of the Ukrainian sniper units released a video showing how he hunts a Wagner soldier in the gardens in the suburbs. Ukrainian commander of the forces in Bakhmut also released the video today and showed how 4 HIMARS are sending 24 rockets to hit Russian targets in Bakhmut. Some sources say that the targets are located on the territory of the ASM industrial complex. As you remember previously, Ukrainians already hit one of the workshops with the ballistic missile Tochka.